Welcome to Tall Talk Times podcast, the podcast made by beautifully tall people.
For beautifully tall people.
I'm Letty Saunders.
And I'm Tom Garner. Hello.
Hi, Tom.
How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. Looking forward to this recording session today because you're talking about one of my favourite authors.
We'll come on to him later. But I understand, Letty, because unfortunately I could not be at the last event for Tall Talk Time. So how was it?
Fantastic venue.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely beautiful venue. It's the Last Judgment in Chancery Lane.
The Last Judgment.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bit biblical.
Well, it's got a lot of history with the Knights Templar.
Okay. Yeah. Chancery Lane, yes, of course. There used to be another pub there called The Temple, and it was a Wetherspoons, but it was a nice Wetherspoons.
This may well be the same pub. Used to be a Wetherspoons.
Were there columns in there? Some kind of quite high ceilings and...
Very high ceilings, absolutely stunning. Some people weren't comfortable with the extra space and other people loved it.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's interesting to see the disparity in... See, tall people don't necessarily have to be in a tall venue.
No, quite.
But I mean, it was very beautiful. Very lovely, and the owner turned up, gave me a bottle of champagne to share, so that was nice.
Just for you?
No, to share.
I'm sorry, to share. Right.
So that was lovely.
I mean, that's always a good day, isn't it, when you're given a bottle of champagne? Was it on the house?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
He said thank you for turning up, and can I buy you a bottle of champagne?
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm very envious. Crikey. Was it a good bottle of champagne?
It was a very good bottle of champagne.
So, grown-up grape juice.
A little bit more, I think.
Well, that's what wine is, isn't it? It's just grape juice for grown-ups, really. But I know there's different levels of quality.
Yes, indeed. And Nat brought along the Tall Talk Times business cards, which he's been working on behind the scenes.
Oh,
they're very flash, Tom.
Now, because we're broadcasting in audio format, for those who can't see the business cards, what do they look like?
Well, they are on a post on the Facebook group, but they are a matte black business card with our logo on.
Oh yeah, very snazzy.
Very snazzy. So, the idea being that we give those business cards to other tall people, and there's a QR code on there so people can scan and go straight to the group.
Well, this is very professional sounding. Wow, well done.
It is very professional.
Yeah,
brilliant.
That was fantastic.
So, no, it was a very interesting evening because they've got something there called Footsie Friday.
Footsie Friday?
So it's like the stock exchange, but think drink prices.
Oh, Footsie. I thought it was like something to do with football or something.
No.
Oh, stock
that
exchange.
Would be a different venue, I think. Footsie Friday, as drinks become more popular, their price would increase. And as drinks become less popular, economics.
I don't understand economics.
Do you not?
Not especially. I mean, I've got a bank account.
Supply and demand?
I've heard of those terms, yes. yes, they ring a bell. They sound very clever.
Okay, well, it's a lovely venue anyway. A really beautiful venue. And
good.
I'm very grateful for all the people that came out and joined us. And
I hear somebody came a long way.
Di.
Oh, where's Di from?
Di Reynolds. Come on, guess.
Oh, Di. Is he from Wales? But
He's from Wales.
And did he come all the way from Wales?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, wow. Well, Di, very good. Well done.
Di Reynolds, also known as the Legend.
Di the Legend.
And Di, you told me that I'm allowed to use the accent because...
oh, yes, me too, sorry.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of Welsh blood in there somewhere.
Oh, I see. We clearly got quite a reach.
Yeah, it was lovely to see people from all over, near and wide. So when somebody messaged me and said, do you ever have any events in East London? But no, we move the event around every month. But really, I think you can travel from East to West London if we have people coming all the way from Wales.
It sounds possible, yes. If you're living in London, I think travelling internally shouldn't be too much of a problem.
Absolutely beautiful location with a rather generous and lovely owner.
Fantastic. Well, clearly, when I'm not there, the champagne comes out. Fantastic.
Do you like champagne, Tom?
I must admit, I know it's a symbol of decadence. I'm quite indifferent to champagne.
Oh, well, you wouldn't have missed much then.
I suppose not.
We'll get you some cider.
Cider, yeah, bowl of chips. I'm quite happy. And now this week it is, of course, Giants of History. And Letty, I hear you've been looking forward to this one.
Very much, Tom.
Jolly good. So this week, our Giant of History is none other than Oscar Wilde.
Yay!
Yay!
One of my favourite authors.
Yeah. So many of you will be familiar with Oscar Wilde, but you might not be so familiar with his height. But what we'll do, before we get on to that, we'll do a little potted history of Wilde's life and career. So, born in Dublin in 1854, Wilde was an Irish poet and playwright. During the 1890s, he became one of the most widely acclaimed literary figures of his time, penning, amongst other things, the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, and his most important work, which was a play called The Importance of Being Earnest. Wilde was also famous for his witticisms, and he was married with 2 children. Now, his witticisms, I mean, if you go to any bookshop, there are whole books just filled with random quotes that he would say. So Wilde is basically known for his comedy, but the ironic thing was the comedy that he would write did not really reflect his personal life. Because at the height of his fame in 1895, he was convicted of what was then termed gross indecency with men. Now, in modern parlance, that basically means he was convicted of homosexual acts with other men. And for this, he was sentenced to 2 years hard labour. He mostly served his time at HMP Reading, so for non-British listeners, HMP means prison, where he wrote his last great work, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, which was a long poem addressed to his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. Now, when Wilde was released from prison in 1897, he'd gone from critical acclaim and being the toast of London to having his health broken and his reputation in tatters. And so what he did, he left the UK and he spent the last years of his life almost penniless and drifting through Europe. And he died aged just 46 in Paris in November 1900.
Just 46?
Just 46. And yet he's so famous today. And that's the thing. In his lifetime, he was acclaimed, but when he died, his reputation had gone completely. He was in disgrace. But since then, his reputation has only grown in stature as people have constantly rediscovered his work. So it's not just Importance of Being Earnest and Picture of Dorian Gray. He wrote children's stories such as The Happy Prince and other plays such as Our Mutual Friend and Salome. That's how they pronounce it, I believe. So his plays are constantly revived. And as part of that, obviously attitudes towards homosexuality also changed.
Yeah.
So in the 60s, it was decriminalised in the UK. And then in 2017, Wilde received a posthumous pardon from the British government.
Good.
Yeah. So he received that pardon along with 50,000 other men who had been convicted under the same law across, I think, well over 100 years. So his reputation is now restored for the most part, and he's commemorated with a stained glass window at Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. So describing all that, most of you will be pretty familiar, I suspect, with the facts of his life. What you might not be so familiar with is his height. So as an adult, Wilde reached the height of 6'3".
6'3".
Yeah, so he can very much join Tall Talk Times.
Which was very tall for that era, though, wasn't it, Tom?
Yes, for that era, you've got to bear in mind that in the 19th century, Britain is at the height of the Industrial Revolution, and people are often malnourished.
Yeah.
There's lots of diseases, particularly in cities, so they would have been a lot shorter because of the conditions they lived in. But of course, he's 6'3", and for those who work in metric, that's 191 centimetres. His father, Sir William Wilde, was a man of average height, but his mother, interestingly, she was a lady called Jane. She was actually 6 feet tall.
Okay.
Which, considering that's very tall.
Yeah, and I believe sons normally grow taller than their mothers.
Ah, there you go.
It may be an urban myth.
Maybe a myth, maybe, but there is something in what you say. I must admit, his parents were very famous in Dublin society, and they were rather cruelly caricatured as the giantess and the dwarf.
Wow,
which is a bit harsh.
Tom, what was the height difference between Oscar Wilde's mum and dad?
All the sources I found, they said like he was of average height, so I would say about 5'6", 5'7", something like that.
Okay.
For Victorian times.
So, yeah.
But obviously, it's you don't usually see a taller woman with a shorter man, and if she's 6 foot tall in the 19th century society, they're gonna stand out as a
Yeah.
distinctive looking couple.
There are people out there challenging the stereotypical norms of that statement, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But people would often comment on his parents' height, as we've just described. But in later years, Wilde's fellow Irish playwright, George Bernard Shaw, now he speculated without any medical evidence that Lady Jane Wilde had giantism, and that this somehow contributed to Wilde's homosexuality. Speaking as a historian, I think this largely explains why George Bernard Shaw was a playwright and not a medic, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's a very diplomatic way of putting it, Tom.
Basically,
Yeah,
he was talking out of his behind, basically. But Wilde himself, as we know, grew to 6'3" tall. Now, when he was at school, a contemporary later wrote, Wilde was a very big boy, very tall for his age, and distinctly heavy of build. One of his schoolfellows said that he used to flop about ponderously. So I've got this image of like a rather awkward teenage boy, sort of bit gangly, not quite got his balance, if that makes sense.
What teenage boy that growing so much, as you yourself will remember,
Yes.
not that long ago, listeners. Most teenagers long and gangly, especially tall.
Oh, yeah. I can speak from personal experience. I was very long and gangly and had absolutely no coordination.
Proprioception issues coming late,
I was always bumping into things, not just door frames, but I would walk into walls and things like that. So basically, it sounds to me like Wilde is a typical case of a boy who's a bit too big for his body.
Yeah, wakes up every morning and there's an extra bit of him.
Yeah, exactly. But unlike a lot of people who often become self-conscious about their heights, such as myself, I'll be honest, it turns out Wilde was very proud of his height.
Good. So one of the forerunners of the positive height movement.
Exactly, a forerunner of the beautifully tall mantra. So I found an interesting quote in one of his biographies. So there was a biography written by a man called Frank Harris, and his biography was called Oscar Wilde, His Life and Confessions. Now, Harris is interesting in that he was a friend of Wilde's, so he knew him very well. And he wrote about Wilde's height. He was proud of his physical appearance, inordinately pleased with his great height, vain of it even. Height gives distinction, Wilde would declare, and once even went so far as to say, one can't picture Napoleon as small. One thinks only of his magnificent head and forgets the little podgy figure. It must have been a great nuisance to him. Small men have no dignity.
Oh my!
So this is a guy who clearly is I think vanity comes into it, but clearly he considers himself to be beautifully tall.
Well, height does give distinction. I agree with Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, and so Harris continued after that quote. All of what Wilde said is all of this is utterly unconscious of the fact that most tall men have no ever-present sense of their height as an advantage. Yet on the whole, one agrees that height is the chief beauty of a man. It gives presence. So clearly Harris was agreeing with Wilde that, it's a good thing to be tall.
Sorry, listeners.
Yeah, I've been so enthusiastic I've bashed the microphone. If you've heard the sound.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Tool advantage. There is a tool advantage.
Tool advantage.
Out there. Yeah,
long arms, though, don't really help. I'm going to keep my hand a little bit more in
long
control.
arms do help.
They do help.
But not at that precise moment.
Oh, well. I'll own it. So Wilde, clearly very conscious of his height, but he's proud of it. Other people would notice it as well. So in 1882, at the start of his career, Wilde went on a celebrated tour of the United States. He would give lectures in all parts of the country. And on the 21st of February, 1882, he visited Cincinnati. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Cincinnati? Yeah. He visited Cincinnati, and a local newspaper reported, in person, he is very tall, with broad shoulders and a plethora of arms and legs. That is, he has the usual complements of limbs, but they appear longer and more loosely jointed than perfect accord which manly beauty requires.
Okay.
Which is quite a long-winded way of saying that he's still flopping about ponderously, I suspect.
Flopping about ponderously.
Flopping about ponderously, which we know is fantastic. And then conversely, at the tail end of his career, when he was released from prison, Wilde immediately travelled to France, where some of his loyal friends were there to meet him at the dock. One of his friends, Robert Ross, he recalled, as the steamer glided into the harbour, Wilde's tall figure, dominating the other passengers, was easily recognised.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sense that this is a guy who's not just charismatic. His height really adds to his charisma. You can't miss him. He sticks out a mile, and you suspect for most of his life that's what he wanted. He wanted to be seen.
No choice really when we're tall.
No choice, but I think for Wilde, it's like a kind of he saw it as a superpower, like a good weapon in his arsenal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's Wilde's life himself, but it's noticeable that that the most famous actors who have portrayed him on film, so this includes Stephen Fry and Rupert Everett, they're the same height as Wilde.
Yeah.
And their physical presence adds to the character's distinctive appearance on screen. And I'll give you a comparison. Before Fry and Everett made relatively recent films about Oscar Wilde, he's been portrayed by smaller actors such as Peter Finch and Robert Morley. Now, I've seen most of these films, and I including the older ones, and I think that while Peter Finch and Robert Morley give good performances, the fact that they're not as tall as the real Wilde means that they're not quite as convincing on screen. Does that make sense?
Do you think that?
I think so, yeah, because Wilde is larger than life as a human being, and so Stephen Fry and Rupert Everett, they're both also larger than life, and them having their height in the films clearly gives them more presence. It's kind of like what Frank Harris was saying earlier on about the real Wilde, about how it gave him distinction.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting fact. So I think if you're going to play Oscar Wilde on film, you do have to be as tall as him to make it work. And finally, I have one final interesting fact about Oscar Wilde. It's not actually to do with his height. It's more to do with context. So Wilde died in November 1900. That's before Queen Victoria died. So this is 124 years ago.
Yeah.
Despite that, his only grandson, Merlin Holland, is still alive.
Yes.
And he's only 78. And he spent most of his life writing about his grandfather.
Wow.
So that's fantastic. I mean, the fact that his grandson is still
with us.
And is quite keen to chat about him.
Oh, well, that's good. I wish him all the health and wealth in the world.
Yeah, but that gives you a sense of, we think of Wilde as quite a long ago figure, and he is a figure from the Victorian past. But having his grandson still with us still gives us a sense of actually connectivity. Yeah. So there we go, a fantastic giant of history, Oscar Wilde.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Tom. And I think. Yes, height does give distinction.
It does, doesn't it?
Was it Oscar Wilde said it?
Yes,
I agree.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're not feeling beautifully tall, take a leaf out of Wilde's book and just carry yourself well.
Thanks, Tom. That was lovely.
You're welcome.
Just a reminder for all those computer users out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's health and safety guidelines to achieve a good working posture. Make sure that you're not in any pain. All back.
Is this when you're sitting at a desk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a few guidelines. The Health and Safety Executive, hse.gov.uk, says that designing tasks, equipment and workstations to suit the user can reduce human error, accidents and ill health.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Failure to observe ergonomic principles can have serious consequences for individuals and for the whole organisation.
A failure to observe ergonomic principles?
Well...
Oh, wow, sounds very serious.
It does, doesn't it? So we say, well, what does this actually mean? Well, computing-related health and safety here, because a lot of us do use computers.
Yeah.
So to achieve a good working posture at your workstation, Tom...
Yes.
Adopt a straight-on position, so you're not twisted.
Okay.
So avoid twisting your body,
your
legs. Don't stoop.
Don't stoop. It's not a good thing.
Which is hard for some beautifully tall people, I understand. But don't sit on the edge of your seat either.
Oh.
So, posture aside, sitting for a long period of time. You said this to me earlier.
I did, yeah.
But you have breaks.
Yeah.
That's very important.
No, I definitely say so. So, for example, I work remotely for my day job, and it is very much a case of do not sit down for hours and hours and hours by a computer screen, particularly if you're very tall. So, because we all know that we're susceptible to back problems. So, what I will do, I will just get up, and even if it's just going to the kitchen and moving around, at least I'm doing something to not be sedate all the time. Yeah, this sounds very sensible.
Well, posture aside, staying in any position for a long period of time can cause you discomfort.
Yeah.
So, yes, vary your posture occasionally. There are some other pointers. Obviously, your seats, you need to adjust your back height and tilt to give excellent lumbar support.
Yes.
Ensure your chair is stable and adjustable so it fits you. Your forearms and your wrists are roughly horizontal with the keyboard, so your wrist to your hand flows.
So your wrist has to be like flatter rather than raised, if that makes sense.
So ensure your shoulders are relaxed, not hunched or leaning forward, and avoid excess pressure on the back of your knees and thighs.
This is health and safety gone sensible.
Well, just basic common sense, really, isn't it? Your feet should be flat on the floor.
Yeah.
We beautifully tall lot, we don't need footrest.
No, I've never used a footrest.
No. But to ensure that your feet reach the floor, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but my feet reach the floor.
So do mine.
But many people, I suppose, will need a footrest.
This is true. I do think as well, getting the right computer chair is important, because I've worked in offices before where they'll just give you a random computer chair, but it's often very bad for your back. For example, so I'd say if you can get the comfiest, best quality computer chair that you can that has a big back support and arms, and you can adjust it properly, because it sounds quite mundane, but it does make a difference.
So long as the arms mean that you can get your chair under the table, your employer should do an assessment, really. But the basic principles being ensure that the screen is at a comfortable viewing distance for you as well.
Yeah.
The chair, to make sure that there's room underneath the table before you have your legs there. So thankfully here, I've just put my hands under the table. There's a good couple of inches before my thighs underneath the table.
That's good.
But there are offices that I've worked in the past where the scraping on the top of the knee, guaranteed every time. So making sure that you have your chair adjusted correctly for yourself. Yeah, so ensure that the screen is at a comfortable viewing distance. The height and the angle of the screen should be comfortable for you. Blinds are very important to make sure that you don't have a lot of glare, because it's not just about your back, it's about your eyesight as well.
Yeah.
And the top of the screen should be round about where your eye level is.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, some people think you get dry eyes if you look up and sore neck if you look down, or the other way around.
Oh dear.
So there are so many things to consider, but there is a display screen equipment workstation checklist on the Health and Safety Executive website. So there's workstations and assessment. So if workers use display screen equipment, DSE, daily as part of their normal work, continuously for an hour or more, employers must do a workstation assessment, not just looking at the equipment, furniture and work conditions, but the job being done and any special requirements of that member of staff, for instance, if they have a disability. So that's if you're using the screen for over an hour.
That's a really good tip.
That's when that assessment should kick in.
Yeah.
So your neck should be naturally straight and the top of the screen is at eye level.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually made quite a lot of difference to me, because my screen was too high.
Right.
I've lowered that slightly because I thought, well, I'm very tall, so I need a screen really high. But it's just about making sure that level is there.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, you often see in workplaces these stand-up computer stands. Do you know the ones I mean?
Oh, that's a different load of there is a section for standing up desks.
Yeah, but I often wonder, because I've never used them myself, but I keep thinking, would there be ones high enough for people, well over 6 foot?
Do adjust. I know that in other Northern European countries they're very popular.
Yes. because I've seen them, I often thought, I might as well work off the ceiling at this rate. Yeah.
Also, if you are looking at a document, I know you do this quite a lot, look at a document and refer to it from your screen, have a side clip document holder.
Right.
So you're going from one level straight across rather than looking up, down.
Okay.
That will if you think of about 8 hours or 5 hours at a desk,
Yeah, it's a long time, isn't it?
that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and if you think about that, that's a normal working day, obviously. But if you're doing that all the time as a tall person sitting down, yeah, you've really got to bear your height health in mind.
Sure, so we have to recognise potential hazards from spending long hours of display screen equipment work, adjusting furniture for maximum physical comfort, organising the workstation to prevent repetitive or harmful movements, maintaining equipment. But your employer will be able to give you the checklist, will be able to do the assessment for you. If you're working over an hour, it's their legal requirement. So just a few pointers there really, Tom, but that's in relation to people who use computers a lot.
Yeah.
But we don't all have, a lot of people are self-employed or work from home. So those little checklists and making sure that your seat is fully adjustable, that you can tilt the back height and the lumbar support, and that it provides proper back support, but it's also at the right height.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. Thank you, Letty. It's all really good.
Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Fantastic, Letty. So, well, that comes to the end of Tall Talk Times episode 9. I've had a fantastic time. Oscar Wilde and desktop health and safety. Who'd have thought they could go together in the same episode?
So, Tom, tell us who the Giants of History is next week.
Well, I won't give you an exact name, but I'll give you... I know, but I'll give you a little hint. So next week, listeners, we're going to go to medieval Spain.
Medieval Spain, back in time.
Back in time to meet a king, no less.
The king of medieval Spain.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, with medieval Spain, there were lots of kings to choose from, and that's not just because of the span of time, but also there were loads of little kingdoms in Spain. So we're not going to meet a king of Spain. We're going to meet a king of one of the tiny kingdoms before Spain was what it is today. So, Letty, what about you? What's going to happen next week as well?
Well, I'm going to bring up some stats and share with the listeners where we have our listeners on podcast around the world.
Oh,
You'd be surprised, actually, Tom.
I'll be globe-trotting.
You may well be.
I say trotting. If it's all people who are going to be striding, aren't we? Globe striding.
Globe
Yeah,
striding.
yeah, I like it. I'm going to own it.
It gets worse. It gets worse. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for listening. Tom, Giants of History, perfect. Thank you very much.
Oh, no, you're welcome. And thank you, Letty, for finding all the current affairs information. It's fantastic.
Thank you, listeners. This is Tall Talk Times podcast made by beautifully tall people.
For beautifully tall people. Goodbye.
Bye.